Today, how will the presidency of Donald Trump and Elon Musk's DOGE affect state and local services? Welcome to State Scoop's Priorities podcast, where every Wednesday you'll get insights into the state and local government community and learn about the latest news and trends across the industry. I'm Colin Wood, State Scoop's editor-in-chief. Here's what's happening this week. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds this week signed an executive order creating a Department of Government Efficiency task force. The task force borrows its name from Elon Musk's DOGE unit, which has been slashing through the federal government the last 3 weeks. Iowa's DOGE will include 15 to 20 private industry business leaders tasked with finding ways to maximize their use of taxpayer funds. The Iowa governor testified before a House committee last week that Iowa was doing DOGE before DOGE was a thing. California Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered updates to the state's fire maps, which were most recently updated last April. An executive order directs the Office of the State Fire Marshal to publish updates to the state's fire hazard severity zone maps, which will mandate a more conservative approach to managing natural vegetation in some of the state's most fire-prone regions. Newsom said the changes are intended to protect urban areas from extreme firestorms. The Beck Center for Social Innovation and Social Impact at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. has published a new tracker for state chief data officers. The tool tracks details on the 32 state chief data officers or equivalent roles, including their names, year the role was established, and links to enabling legislation and open data portals. Ali Benson, director of the Beck Center's Data Labs initiative, told me the tool lends increased visibility to an increasingly important role. On this episode of Priorities, I separately interview Amanda Renteria, CEO of the civic tech nonprofit Code for America, and Robert Gordon, a former Joe Biden White House advisor who's worked at all levels of government over the past 3 decades. He was in the New York City Department of Education, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and he worked at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services also. Renteria likewise has government experience to draw on. She spent a year in San Jose, California, working on city projects like its Strong Neighborhoods initiative. She spent 8 years as chief of staff for Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow and California Senator Dianne Feinstein. And she was a national political director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. I wanted to interview Robert and Amanda because they're both in an interesting position. These are public servants who've dedicated their careers to improving government, making it more efficient, and striving to make it more effective and to serve the public. These are some of the same goals that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency unit advertises, though his tactics are starkly different than any that our 2 guests have employed. We start with Amanda Renteria, who shares what she thinks of the current moment.
Listen, this is an exciting time for someone like me, having been in public service for pretty much my entire career. And I've really enjoyed the idea of waking up every day trying to figure out how to make people's lives better. At all levels of government and in all the different areas of government, whether that's policy, politics, implementation, or communications. I've always believed that we have a pretty remarkable democracy and that it's all up to us to be a part of it, to make sure it works for everyone. And so over the course of my career, I've really had a chance to work on the front lines in the city of San Jose, but also in justice at the Department of Justice in California. And then at the highest levels of government in the United States Senate, while we were going through a pretty big transition in the Great Recession, and also putting in place policies like healthcare reform that really changed our economy and our government in huge ways for all people. And then most recently being at Code for America, where it kind of put all of my work together, which is, you fight for policy, you fight for folks to fight for that policy, and then you put it in place and hope it gets to real people. And that's what Code for America does. So we now get a chance, whether it's making your taxes easier to file, or whether it's people who are trying to get food assistance or kids who are trying to get school lunch programs, It's things like that that Code for America works on the front lines with governments, trying to really bring it into this new digital age.
Right. And the reason I wanted to talk to you was that there are a lot of big changes in Washington happening right now. And the New York Times maintains a list of all of the major moves that the Trump administration has made in its early weeks. And it's already grown into a pretty impressive list, as anyone who's paying attention could tell you. Too many things to name, but just some of them that might be relevant for us. Plans to reduce the federal workforce, the shrinking of CISA's mandate, uncertainty about federal grant programs, and we've already started to see maybe a preview of what some of this could mean for state and local government. I'm thinking of instances of Medicaid systems struggling to make payments in some cases. You have reports of some Head Start programs um, kind of reporting uncertainty about their futures, cuts at USAID, Department of Education. Those could all have trickle down effects. No one really knows everything that's going to happen, but to start, I'm assuming that you're hearing from a lot of states and localities. What are you hearing from them? What's the mood?
Yeah. Well, I think what you would say is everyone feels extremely on edge, right? Whether it's trying to figure out how and what's going to happen in weeks from now, or whether it's just trying to figure out what's the latest change coming down from Washington D.C. And so we're hearing a couple of different things. One is, how do we prepare for this moment of change, right? Oftentimes we're working with governments on how to smooth out their systems or upgrade their systems. And right now, states, what we're hearing is, how do I even figure out what to prepare for? The other piece that we consistently hear from states is folks are worried, right? The people in their cities, the people in their states, they're getting more and more questions of, what does this mean for my kid going to school? What does this mean for my healthcare? And trying to navigate that with states right now has been really difficult, because this is an unusual time where not only are you seeing change from the federal level, which often you will see in any administration. Administration comes in, you kind of know their vision or their ideas or what they're going to lean into. This administration has made it extremely unusual because they're pushing envelopes in ways that have never been done before. The idea that you're going to make a sweeping freeze on funds for Medicaid is something states have never seen before. And so, what we're doing in real time is trying to actually share exactly what the New York Times is, which is, here are the latest executive orders coming out. Here are the things that are actionable right now. Here are the things that are likely to go to court, and here are the things that you need to start preparing for a month or 2 months from now. And really trying to triage what's coming at them is really where states are kind of sitting in that space, recognizing that they don't have all the answers, but how do they actually strengthen their communications to people to help people through this moment?
Hmm, I see. Well, outside of that, how does all of this uncertainty affect the ability to create policy, to make decisions? What is happening to various programs and services under
So
this environment?
yeah, so what you are seeing is states getting ready for, as an example, Medicaid is likely to change. How do we make sure that government, whether it's your client success teams, are ready to take those questions, or whether it's your actual systems to be ready for any evolving policy changes that this administration might have? So our work, we're in a lot of different projects with governments. Many of those governments now want to speed up that process. Can we get through the build faster, or can we get through the pilot faster, so that we're ready for the real policy changes that are going to be coming down, or for us to be able to step in should the federal government either freeze funds, change funds, get rid of programs that are particularly helping the most vulnerable communities in states and localities.
Right. Um, Now, many of the people who are critical of DOGE and the Trump administration's a lot of his recent actions are, they may have disagreements on policy, but I think kind of the primary objection, for at least from my reading, is in the implementation. The fact that it's so chaotic, that it's going so quickly, that a lot of it isn't telegraphed. It's just sort of going forward. Um, but in some ways, I would expect that some of what the administration purports to want are the same things that your group is advocating for. More efficiency, government that works better. To what extent do you overlap with the Trump administration's efforts in terms of the things that we're talking about, and where do you diverge?
Yeah. So listen, I have to say, I'm excited about modernization. We've known not only 15 years ago when we first started, but even before then, that governments needed to modernize their systems. So in that sense, a way of thinking differently, a way of really bringing in what you see in the private sector in the government so that they can serve people better, that's always been true. What is difficult with the way this administration is approaching this is it's one key idea, which is how do you cut? And when you do that, you actually really don't understand the broad nuance of what government is trying to do. And so the idea that, and we often say this, which is it's not about efficiency, it's about being an effective government. And when you think of effective and how do you serve people better, if that is what you are focused on, you can actually both get to effectiveness and efficiency at the same time. We've seen it over and over again in red and blue states that when you put in modernized systems, if you center the people it serves, you can get to both of those goals. But one of the things that I've been grappling with over the last several weeks is really having people understand that government isn't a business. Government isn't a tech business specifically, right? I think we've often seen tech companies 1.0 in the government came in and said, gosh, if you just had the right product, you can do this. Or, we know better in business, so let us tell you how it works in government. That's just not how it works to actually bring in real change into government modernization. And so I like to say a couple things. One, government isn't a startup. You can't, in Silicon Valley, people often talk about failing more times than they win. In government, you can't fail people. This is their lifeline. I think the other pieces that we see is oftentimes in tech or in business, you get to choose your customers. And oftentimes those are the customers that can pay the highest price. But government is exactly the opposite, right? You are the place where you're supposed to serve everyone, even those folks that are hardest to reach. That makes it and the model very different. That's why you can't just focus on cutting or one blunt idea at the end of it. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is particularly with this administration where we've deviated, is when we think about outcomes in partnership with government, we don't think about a number, we think about people. And when you see that Trump has come in or DOGE has come in and said, we're going to hit $2 trillion in cuts, if you try and chase that number, you will harm people. And that's what we saw in the freeze, right? It's not hard to do math and say, well, if you just cut out that department and this department, you can get to 2 trillion. But that means you're not actually seeing the people you're serving and what impact it's going to have on them. And so we very much deviate in what is our goal. Is it to hit a number, or is it actually to make government more effective? And that can include make government more innovative, make sure it's not only like on the cutting edge, but that it's making sure to help people continue to rise the economic ladder or be able to achieve their dreams. And that part is very different than what we're seeing right now.
Are there any specific policies or changes that you feel are that we should be focusing on right now in terms of state and local government services and IT systems? Which ones are the most important for us?
Yep. So, what we have seen over the last 4 years is a lot more work being done to reach communities that are hard to reach, whether that's in rural areas, whether that's in different communities, tribal nations, et cetera. And some of the work that we have seen have been really good in building mobile first apps like Direct File, making it super easy to file your taxes, making it super easy to get a child tax credit that was passed last year. Things like that are incredibly important for folks. And so what I don't want to be lost here is this idea that government can be modernized and how important it is for people. The other side to that, though, and I think it gets lost in a lot of the conversations, is what government learns from modernized systems, that data, right? The data that shows you who was served, what worked, why did this application process work versus that other application process. What I worry about is the erasure of all the data that's been gained over the last several years in these new modernized systems will really teach us, how do you actually combat poverty? How do you make sure every kid is actually eating lunch and has resources to food? Those kinds of things are the things that worry me the most. It's a lot of what you're seeing also in medical research, right? If we lose that data that has taught us how to empower people more, you can't just make it up later. I mean, that is the investments that governments have put in to understanding the data, to understanding the research, and to making sure to help people really chase their own dreams. I don't want to start all over again. And I think that's what I worry about, is that once this administration has gone through sweeping cuts, what's left? Because it's easier to tear things down than it is to build up. That's certainly what we've learned over the last 15 years.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that this data stuff might become important at some point.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just
Maybe
say to that,
AI. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
and the other thing I'll say to that, Colin, is, um, government, one of the things that we benefited in this country is government was, yes, it changed, but it was largely stable. And that's where people went when they're in crisis. And the lack of trust and confidence right now and the chaotic nature of it does make everybody's lives, just everyday lives, a little more unstable. And I do worry about, how are we going to rebuild that confidence and trust in our government systems again? Because folks are going to need it. They need it every single time there's a crisis. We talk a lot about Code for America. Like, what are we doing in that moment of crisis to make sure that government is there? Because sometimes there's the only people there. And it's not lost on me that if you start to actually gut government, who is going to be there when you have the LA fires? Who is going to be there when you have the North Carolina floods? Who is going to be there when you can't quite make ends meet and need food on the table for your family?
Right. FEMA. Oh wait, no, not FEMA. Okay, so um, how now the state IT efforts, IT modernization efforts, they take these can be long-term projects that can take years or decades
Yeah.
to complete. Um, how are it's kind of, when we talk about the things that are happening, I understand it's a very broad term. I'm not
Yeah.
specific policy, but generally speaking, in terms of grant availability and in terms of support, just general support from various federal agencies, are these state IT, and I suppose in some cases local government IT modernization projects, are those being affected by this?
Absolutely. I think what you're seeing across the state is, folk across the country, is states are really concerned about budgets in general. What is the federal government going to do? I mean, the freeze was a quick message that to every state, to every program leader out there, is, I've got to make sure that I can still take care of people. And so what it has meant is, some of these improvement projects that folks have been working on to upgrade their systems, everyone's a little bit on hold right now, trying to figure out, what can I actually invest in, because I don't know what's going to come down from the federal government. That part has really paralyzed some of the progress that has been made in modernization. And so where we have stepped in is to say, how can we help you in this moment so that we don't lose momentum to serving people more effectively, to serving people more, not only effectively, but efficiently, right? We do a lot of work on the back end with caseworkers to help them actually help people faster or get through their caseloads so that people can get the resources they need. A lot of those changes, it does require time and investment. And when people are scared about, is this program going to be cut entirely? The highest order isn't to actually make it better. It's, how do you actually hunker down and just make sure you're going to be ready for whatever's going to come at you?
Well, do you have advice for state and local government IT officials, or just officials in general? What should they be doing right now if they're uncertain or?
Yeah. So we're excited to be part of really a collaboration across the country and different states that are working on, whether it's a safety net or tax benefits. And what we have seen in those conversations is, the more best practices they're sharing in real time has really helped. So when changes happen, and we've seen this during the pandemic, after the pandemic, when policies changed, the best collective wisdom is actually folks on the front lines in the different states sharing how they're navigating those changing policies. And so seeing the efforts around that, not only sharing like, okay, if this were to happen, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? That's a really important bond to create right now, especially as things are changing. But the second piece is, and we've been doing a lot of this, is strengthening the texting and communication, the rapid response from governments themselves, so that when policies change, they can actually communicate with folks who are on Medicaid to say, hey, you have to get your renewals in now. This has changed. Or in case you didn't know, food assistance now is at this level versus that level. And so the idea of focusing on your communications channels right now is hugely important, because we know this is likely to be a year of ever changing policies or implementation, or even when court cases come down and change, we recognize that's going to have an effect on how things get implemented at the local level.
Right. Um, and Code for America is, of course, involved with a lot of this work. State and local
Yeah.
governments. You referenced direct file earlier. Um, what is Code for America's work do you expect will look like over the next 4 years?
4 years feels very far away right now. I feel like we're going week by week.
Right.
But I don't think it changes much, because what we are involved in is really helping governments navigate an evolving world, and really trying to use not only the tools of technology, but human centered technology. And I think as we fast forward, I have a feeling government is going to look very different in a year from now. And our role is not only how do we navigate and help partner with states to make sure their people in their states are taken care of in the short term, but also with the long lens of rebuilding that trust, rebuilding our systems. We like to say, and we've been saying this for a while now, but governments need to be ready, responsive, and resilient. And now more than ever, our ability to make sure they're all three of those are really what we're going to continue to focus on. It's just right now the breadth by which we are helping because of all the changes that are coming. Um, it's a lot to take on. And I'll also say this, I think the one focus that I've tried to really talk through with governors and others in this space is, let's not forget to storytell here, because there are really great success stories of how government can work for people. And I think right now we're seeing an attack on public servants. We're seeing an attack on government as an institution in general. But what Code for America has seen on the front lines is we have seen government better serve people. We do have people say, thank you so much for making tax filing easier. I just got half my life back. I think that hope that our institutions can work again, and our hope and the hope that they can help you become a better person, a better mom, a better teacher, those kinds of things, we need to keep telling that story. And so what I hope 4 years from now is that we're on the other side of this, showing that government, in fact, is better for the people, that government, in fact, can evolve with the changing times and be stronger for it.
That was Amanda Renteria, CEO of Code for America. Next is Robert Gordon, the former Biden advisor.
I think that there's multiple levels of impact, and I don't think I have any great wisdom here compared to many people who are tracking this in real time along with me. I think there's one set of impacts around just dollars and what they're doing to dollars, and that has a short-term dimension, which is this rapid fire freeze on funding, both grants and contracts. Those look a little bit different. There's a second dimension, which is what they're doing to the federal workforce, which involves reductions in staffing, reductions in capacity, and then maybe there's one more dimension just around very specific systems that people rely on. Payment systems obviously have been in the news, but there's a tremendous amount of interdependency, I don't need to tell your audience, between federal and state technology systems and programs like Medicaid, and those will be substantial impacts as well.
Right. One of the things that I hear from the main comment that I hear from state officials, especially state IT officials right now, is that they're just not sure what's going on, and in terms of how this is going to affect their work in the future. And the sort of number one phrase I hear is we're gonna wait and see. Um, what effect does, just based on your experience in government, what effect does uncertainty have on any organization that has to make decisions, set policy?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot to fix in the government. And every time I have been in, I have done my best to improve systems, to streamline the delivery of grants, to streamline the way that people get benefits so that they spend less time waiting, so that the people inside government who are processing benefits can move more quickly, can provide better service, can do more high value work. So there is so much work we need to do. I tend to think that you want a base of stability and confidence on which to reform, and that's the way that you get people done. I think you have now, as everyone says, a move fast and break things ethos. And the consequence, as you say, is like just jarring uncertainty, which is tremendously, it impairs people's ability to do their work. You can't blame people for not focusing on service delivery, for helping people who are experiencing homeless, or helping people who are homelessness, or helping people who are in need of help with substance use disorders, or helping people who need help with their education or job training or delivering housing or transportation, all the things that we depend on government to do. And those people are right now transfixed by this massive drama in Washington. And it is very distracting. And of course, if they don't know if they're going to have the money to make payroll this week, that's a whole other order of challenge. So I do think there's a tremendous, tremendous amount of disruption and harm that is occurring just because of this uncertainty. And I'm not in the government anymore, but I have tremendous sympathy for all the people who are dealing with it, not just every day, but it feels like every hour.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people on LinkedIn or wherever announcing resignations still. I think maybe these are people who wanted to hang on, wanted to continue doing public service, and then, I don't know what's happening, but just for whatever reason, they decided that this wasn't working for them in terms of why they joined government. A lot of these people can um, make a lot more money working in the private sector. So, uh,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
that's right. And of course, you have the uh, the perversity of the situation is that the people who are most able to leave are the people who you are most eager to keep, who have specialized skills that are very valuable and are valuable elsewhere. And obviously, there's people who will stay because they believe in the mission, and God bless those folks. And for people who are just saying, I don't want to be here for this anymore, I certainly would not second guess them. I guess part of my thought and my concern is the way that this rolls out from the federal government to the state level and to the local level, and it's felt everywhere. So that is enormous. It is just enormously challenging and destabilizing right now. And I think, um, yeah, it's a sad, alarming situation.
Hmm. So, going back to the idea of government efficiency, which is a goal that you share with Elon Musk's Doge unit, what so we can definitely talk more about what harms you think it may do, but I think you also seem to be open-minded to the possibility that moving fast and breaking things could also have some positive effects, or um, yeah, eventually could have some positive effects. Where do you stand on all of that?
I mean, there's a need for change. I never would have done it this way. I think there will be a question what comes next. That doesn't justify having done it this way, but it does mean that there could be opportunities. I've been following, there's an interesting conversation about the Institute for Education Sciences at the Department of Education, which just had a $900 million out of nowhere cut in, I think, 100 plus contracts. Like, I think a lot of those, I just looked over the list this morning, a lot of those contracts quite important, doing meaningful work. Can I say that about every one of them? No. It just makes sense to cancel them all in one fell swoop. No. Is there a potential opportunity in the sense that it would be good for the country if we had a more focused federal education research enterprise that was more targeted on the most central challenges facing the country? We've had education performance going backwards, and we really do need research to step up. We need, in my view, much more spending on education research, not less. But can you imagine a more focused approach? Absolutely. Was this the way to get there? No. Were there paths to get here that weren't so disruptive and destructive and were consistent with our traditions as a country, as a nation of laws? Yes. But all that said, could there be a substantive other side here that is good? I think that remains to be seen. I don't think anything that's happened so far is a basis for confidence that that will arrive and that will occur. But I also can't tell the future.
Right. Yeah, if you could, I would have you back every week to tell us what's going to happen. So you wrote a very good commentary piece on Jennifer Palka's Substack. Um, I I think it's called Vast Carelessness, about kind of what's happening, and you kind of touched on some of what you're saying now. You said that this administration could have pursued the same ideological goals in a more orderly way, and yeah, I find it is somewhat peculiar that not only is this approach being criticized fairly widely, it's I think it may even be counterproductive to the administration's own goals in some cases. But can you speak a little bit to, uh, you know, going back to where you may agree with what Doge is doing? Maybe agree is a little bit too strong, but going back to where there may be some overlap in your point of view. What are some bureaucratic hurdles and red tape that you've seen in your career that you think eliminating that, how could that potentially be a good thing for state governments
Yeah.
down the line?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I guess what I would say is like, I don't, I'd love to pivot in my own talking about this from the federal situation, which is hugely important. And I think we're already down a very bad path, in part because as important as efficiency is, we also believe in the rule of law and checks and balances. And that is what is most fundamental in defining our country. And efficiency is incredibly important, huge believer, but it does come after what it means to be a democracy with the rule of law. So that's like an order of operations thing at the federal level. As I said, it could be that through this disruption, there are some efficiencies, and that would be better than if there aren't, for sure. I think there's a huge opportunity at the state and local level. Well, there's a huge need because one thing that we know is there's going to be less money coming. We know that. It could be as a result of these immediate reductions in contracts and grants, so I think the courts are going to have something to say about that. But we've got a trifecta in Washington. There's eventually going to be an appropriations bill. There is likely going to be a reconciliation bill. Those are not going to be the products that you would have gotten with divided government or Democrats in charge. And there's going to be less money coming to states, and that's going to create burdens. There's going to be less capacity at the federal level because of all these reductions in staffing, and that's going to create burdens. Potentially, hopefully not, but there's going to be real instability in the core systems that states need for things like Medicaid payments, and that's going to cause burdens. So there is all of this growing need and challenge coming from Washington. And I do think it creates an opportunity at the state level, or again, a need and an opportunity, which is how do states step up to this moment when they have less and deal with some of these longer term problems. So I could talk a little bit more about that, but I think issues around the way that we hire and retain people in government are hugely challenging. Getting the right kind of talent we need, particularly when you think about technology systems, the way that we do procurements, the way that we manage government processes, business processes, policy process that creates burden and cruft and just challenge and makes things harder than it needs to be. And I think it's a moment for state leaders of both parties and for nonpartisan civil servants to think about what is my vision for dealing with those challenges in a way that's constructive and consistent with the rule of law, but also urgent and does not sort of accept excuses. And so that I think is the moment and the opportunity at the state level and the local level.
Right. Is there you mentioned a a coming dip in funding, which is yeah, that's very likely. But is there any possibility that when the federal government lets up on performing a certain function, that the states will then ramp up their efforts in some way, even if they have less federal funding, that maybe you know, the sort of burden of whatever that function is will be left to the states, or is that a non sequitur?
No, I think that's the idea. I mean, one challenge, of course, is states got to balance their budgets every year, so they can only step up so much. But I think there is going to be that need. And I think if you look at Republicans are going to put big pressure on the Medicaid program. There's all this interest in work requirements. Work requirements, by their nature, are designed to and do score savings because they kick people off the program. They also can be implemented better or worse. They can be implemented in ways that at least minimize those reductions, that give people as many chances as possible to keep their coverage. Like this is not this is, in my view, not a good policy idea. It is destructive. It is not pro health. It is not really. It is not pro health, and it is not really pro work either. But if we end up in a world where we are living with them, unfortunately, there will be better and worse ways to implement, and states will need to think about better and worse ways to do that. I hope we don't end up there, but if we do, that will be a conversation about state capacity and states stepping up to differing degrees.
Right. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to get to before we? You had some really interesting news to talk about. Before we get to that, is there anything else you wanted to mention?
Yeah. No, I'm glad to talk a little bit about. I am excited, and some of this isn't yet ready for a full announcement, but very excited to be starting some work supporting states and localities with addressing some of these core challenges around their people function, around supporting building out their capacity to support technology, both through modernizing technology delivery, modernizing procurement, around reducing policy bloat, policy complexity that gets in the way of grantees' ability to do their work, imposes burdens on small businesses. I've been quite inspired by the work of Jennifer Polka, her book Recoding America. There's a lot there about opportunities to modernize government, to streamline it, to make it better support faster, better delivery for people. And so I think there's lots of opportunity there. There's particular urgency now, given all the challenges in Washington we've been talking about. So I will be excited to work with leaders in state and local government. I'll have more to say about that in the future, and just eager to do what I can to be helpful in that space.
Okay, that's great. Um, well, we're only 3+ weeks into the Trump administration, so maybe it's early to talk about lessons learned from this episode. But given the information that we have so far and whatever clarities that is available right now in terms of what's happening, um, what do you think there is to be learned at this point from the perspective of someone who works in state or local government?
I think I don't even know where to begin on that question. Like, I think what's to be learned is like you gotta. We are experiencing a level of disruption that none of us ever imagined, and a level of challenge that none of us ever imagined. And I think for state and local leaders, like obviously you have to wait and see. Things are continuing to unfold. They will continue to change, and we all will see how they change. The courts have begun to engage. That's a process that will take a long time. I think it is a moment to just be prepared for the worst, because I think there is a real chance of I'm not someone who thinks the courts are likely to come in and call a dramatic halt to a lot of activities if you've been tracking the direction of the courts over the last 5 or 10 years. So I think being ready, thinking about contingency planning, and thinking about how to sort of build your strength for this difficult moment, that is the name of the game. And I think it may be a moment where if you can, for example, increase your internal capacity to manage technology, increase your ability to manage procurement so that you get more control of your technology and your vendors are less in the position of they are managed rather than effectively managing, which is so often the experience that many of us have in government. You can improve your delivery, you can lower your cost, and you can be in a better position to deal with all this challenge from Washington. So I think that, is difficult as it is, that is an opportunity now, and it may be a necessity just as resources contract.
That was Robert Gordon. Thank you to both of our guests for appearing on this episode. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to the Priorities Podcast at prioritiespodcast.com or on any of the big podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by leaving a comment or rating, or by messaging us on social media. We want to hear from you. This podcast is a production of Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Thank you to Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher for their wonderful work creating these video and audio podcasts. That's it for this episode. I'm Colin Wood, signing off. Thanks for listening.